Isn't it right that a perpetrator of a crime should face consequences, do you think? Isn't it right that a perpetrator of a crime should face the music for his evil doings? Has that happened in our country? Have there been criminals, and there's too many to name, but has there been criminals in the United States that have paid the penalty for their crime? Not so much now, right? You get a little needle in a little office or place in the jail maybe to die, and I guess it is what it is. At least they're performing capital punishment. But we're in a messed up place. But I'll give you a couple examples in America. Timothy McVeigh, you might remember that name. He met his fate in June of 1995 for the murder of 168 people there in 1995. He took down the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building in Oklahoma City. I've been there. I've seen it. They have a memorial with a whole bunch of little chairs, concrete chairs, and 19 of those 168 were children. You might remember the story of a fireman carrying, I forget what her name was. You remember, hon? All I could think of was Katie was just about that same age at that time. But he destroyed 1/3 of the building, killed 168 people. But in 2001, by execution, he went into eternity. The infamous, remember Bonnie and Clyde? Think of this. 23 years old, she was. 24 years old, he was. They were convicted, or would have been convicted of killing, I believe, 9 police officers and 13 others on their rampage. But they kind of had a bad ending. They died in a hail of bullets. Each of them shot like 30 to 40 times because of their evil. If they had just surrendered, maybe none of this would happen. But God said to Noah in Genesis 9:6, "Whoso sheddeth man's blood, by man shall his blood be shed. Why? For in the image of God made he man." I'll tell you this, all men, in the end, will meet their Maker. No one will escape that court date. Do you know that you have a date with God? Hopefully, it's if you're saved and you die, well, you're still going to be waiting a little bit. But if you happen to live to the rapture, which I hope comes, the world looks like it's coming. But if you go at the rapture, you will have a judgment date too. It's called the judgment seat of Christ. Believers will be judged. Not for their sin, thank the Lord, because we would all fail. But we get judged for how we live our lives in this body. But at that judgment, for the saved, the end of that judgment will be peace. 2 Corinthians chapter 5 talks about the judgment. And in that passage, it talks about God as our Father. So that sentence is going to be peaceful. But in our story, there was one who planned the murder of one. He had one man focused on, and that was Mordecai. That was Haman. He was focused on Mordecai, but attached with that death sentence was the death sentence for the whole nation, or everywhere in his kingdom. But as David Sorensen said, with Haman's cup of iniquity full, God turned the tables on him. Haman is full of iniquity. He's laden with iniquity. He thinks he's going to triumph, but we'll see he ends up in destruction. Come with me into Esther's story, chapter 7, to see our story with this title, The Perpetrator Perishes. The Perpetrator Perishes. As I talked about Timothy McVeigh and Bonnie and Clyde and others, there are countries who will exact judgment the way God says. But God's providential care for this lady and her people climaxes in the execution of their enemy as he fell at her feet imploring her mercy. The very one that had a hatred for Jews falls before a woman Jew. Think of that. No offense against you ladies, but he wanted all the Jews dead. To his chagrin, to his everlasting misery, he could not stand when Haman would not bow to him, but he bowed to a lowly lady, a princely lady, a princessly lady, if you would. But this is an incredible story of God battling for his people, and he timed it so great. God didn't have to do this. He could have killed him at one point and saved her at another point. But God showing his glory, saying, "You're not going to mess with my people. I'm going to take care of business." And he takes care of business in such a way that there's no denial that God is doing it. We know this whole story is about providence and how God is orchestrating events. Do not be afraid when you see God orchestrating events. He never goes against free will of man, because then he would be a capricious God. He would be an evil God. He allows man the freedom to choose him or to reject him, and that's what makes God so great. But he works in between human will and he accomplishes his will. Ultimately, his will be done. Remember Jesus said, Father, not my will be done, but thy will be done. You know what? God has some things he would like to see happen, but they won't happen because of the rejection of mankind. But his ultimate will, in his foreknowledge, knowing the decisions they would make, he's going to accomplish as he pleases. So it's an incredible story. Watch. Timing the decisions of a surrendered people crying out to him. So at the pinnacle, they're crying out to him. This is Esther's last chance to get help. She has talked to God. She's trusting in God. But she has one person humanly that has the ability to stamp out this problem. And that's who she's going to. So it's an incredible story. But the timing of a surrendered decision of his people crying out to him with the effort of a man seeking their total destruction. This clash is one of the greatest in the annals of history. If you've seen great climactic battles, this is a great climactic battle going on between a woman and a man, between a nation and Mordecai and evil. What a clash, and what it's going to be like one day to meet this woman. So this morning I want you to see 3 things in this chapter to consider with principles along the way that I hope you'll take to your heart. So, the perpetrator perishes. That's our title. But our first point, our first thought, we'll find it in verses 1 and 2. We see the king presses for Esther's wish. The king presses for Esther's wish. This is now the 3rd time he's asking her. Think of this. A monarch who had the right to just speak someone's death, and we'll see that in this chapter, he's waiting, and this is the 3rd time he's reaching out to Esther. Esther, what's your wish? We'll see that. So, number 1, the king presses for Esther's wish. 3 times he has asked her what his request was to him. Now watch this. But God providentially delayed her petition. See, she was a free moral agent. They decided there was something I have to do. Mordecai says, I can't do it. He won't listen to me. You are in a prime place to get our people saved because, listen, you're married to the king. You're sleeping with him. You're in his authority structure. You're right next to him. This is nothing else but God doing this. And so she knows this is her job. Remember back in the early chapter, she said, I'll go, I'll fast 3 days, you fast 3 days, and I'll go unto the king, and if I perish, I perish. And Mordecai said, who knows? This is maybe the very reason you were brought to the throne. So 3 times he had asked her what his request was, but God providentially delayed it. And as you see the story unfold, you got to know that's true. He held her back from saying it. Maybe it was through her nervousness that she thought she delayed, but who knows? God, in his power, works within her human will. So God providentially delays her petition, setting the stage for his revenge upon his enemy. Look at where the revenge happens. He asked her, so these are the 3 times that the king asked her. When she first came to the king, chapter 5 and verse 3, when he held out the golden scepter and she walked up and touched the top, he asked her then, what is your wish? He asked again at the first banquet. She said, my wish is that you and Haman will come to the banquet that I'm going to prepare for them today. So they went. He asked her again, and she said, my request is that you come to the banquet I prepared tomorrow. So think about this. As we look at the humanity of this, maybe she was nervous. Maybe I don't know. It's hard for us to tell. But either way, either she was nervous or she had a plan in her mind. Maybe she, again, I can't go into that. That's not for us to see. But something was going on there. But God's hand held her back till the hook was set. You think about the details that happened in between the first time he asked her, the next day when he asked her. There was something that had to happen. And that was Haman goes home. The Bible says he was glad of heart, and he was so happy that he got to be in with the king and the queen. Well, that night the king couldn't sleep. He found out about Mordecai and how he saved him. That's how God was doing this. He was delaying all that till the hook was set, till the trap door closed on Haman. So let's look at verse 1. Verse 1, it says, so the king and Haman came to banquet with Esther the queen. Now, if you know the last chapter, the king found out how great Mordecai was. Haman had to create a great party, a praise party all through the city, and he's wrecked. He's basically a wreck. And he comes home and at the end of chapter 6, and he's mourning, and his wife says, uh-oh, this isn't looking good for you. And while they're talking, the king's chamberlains come to gather him to this meeting. So a lot has changed in Haman's life. So he was so glad he was chosen to meet with Esther the king. But all that joy and gladness was sidelined with his hatred for Mordecai. He hated him so intensely that it interrupted his joy about being lifted up in the kingdom. So he came home on that day glorying in his favor, but was griping about his enemy not falling before him. His family encouraged him to hang Mordecai. He loved the idea, so he had the gallows built. You know, there are evil people. They just love the idea of destruction. I read about an abortionist recently, and he said something about bragging they had committed 60,000 abortions or 20,000 abortions. Can you imagine how awful? This is Mordecai. He's in another world. Okay? So he loved the idea. He has the gallows built. Little did he know that the king was discovering that night, the night prior, the character of Mordecai. In that very point when this is God's providence working, at the very point when maybe he's out there watching this thing being built. And at that same time, the king is finding out about a great man. So the king was discovering the character of Mordecai in chapter 6. Haman had to parade him around, exalting him in praise for saving the king's life. When he got home, he's humiliated before his family. Then they told him in effect, "You're a rat bait." You ever heard that old saying when I was a kid? That guy's a rat bait. That was Haman. And then I say, nice family. Nice family. So now he heads back to Esther's banquet. I wonder if he's wondering, will he remain at the pinnacle of favor with the king? So they come into her private quarters. I kind of feel that's probably where that is. Another commentator said that. I think it's her place. But they come into her private quarters, and the king presses her to give him her wish. Look at verse 2. And the king said again unto Esther, on the second day at the banquet of wine, "What is thy petition, Queen Esther? And it shall be granted thee. And what is thy request? And it shall be performed even to the half of the kingdom." Now, I don't think he's just saying this. I think this woman has so moved upon his heart. She's not like all the other thousands of women he could have gotten, and maybe many that he had. This woman was beautiful. She was fair. But she wasn't just a pretty face. Remember, the Bible says, favor is deceitful and beauty is vain. But a woman that feareth the Lord, she shall be praised. Remember, we talked a few weeks ago, it's in 1 Peter, the sight of a quiet and reserved and godly woman to God is a great price. And I believe that's probably how this lady was. So he's seeing this lady for whom he has a lot of affection and love, I'm assuming. But God hijacked their plan. Remember, their plan was to give this king a harem of beautiful women from Ethiopia all the way to India. God says, nope, I'm going to give you a beautiful woman. See how God is even good? But he gives him a woman of character. A young woman. I don't know how old she was, but she was a fair young virgin. But she had power in her life, probably because of God, obviously, and the way she was raised. We'll see that in a little bit. But anyways, they're there in this banquet, and he presses her to give him the wish. He says, "What is thy petition, Queen Esther? And it shall be granted thee." Watch. "What is thy request?" First he said, "It shall be granted." He had the power to do what he said he was going to do. "It shall be granted thee." And what is thy request? "And it shall be performed even to the half of the kingdom." Amazing. So, what can we learn here? The king has a great love for her. Little does he know the intense anguish she has been going through these recent days. Here's his beautiful queen. He has no idea the agony that's going on in her life. Her chamberlains, her ladies, those that are close to her, they knew what's going on because of the transaction going back and forth. But what is his attitude? So she's going through this great distress, and he had been a key part of her distress. Do you remember that? He's the one that went with his ring, or gave it, he took it off, and somebody else went with the ring on the paper, on the post going 2,800 miles, 1,400 miles one direction, 1,400 miles another direction, and up and down. His ring was part of that. Her anguish was caused by her husband, and he doesn't know it. But little does he know the anguish she's been going through. He is a key part of her distress. But what is his attitude? He has been patiently waiting to help her with whatever she needed. Now, how did God move upon him like this in her time of need? This is all the providence of God. This man is pagan, right? When they had a plan to provide the king with fair young virgins, an oppressive plan on those many women, he took over their plan. Knowing the imminent danger for the Jews, he provided the fair young virgin. It didn't get to be Memucan and all his guys picking him. It got to be Jehovah decided, I'm going to intercept this wicked plan, and I'm going to give him a woman that he had never imagined getting. And he did this to save his own people. He wasn't doing it to satisfy a pagan king. He just happened to be in on the blessing, if you would. So she was he provided this fair young virgin. She was there at the right time in history. Think about her age, her youth, the age of the kingdom. God just put it all together at the right time. But being beautiful, I tell you this, being beautiful would not have been enough. Would not have been enough. He, through Mordecai, created a beautiful woman of character, and Mordecai has credit for this. I believe he raised her with credit. The Bible says she did as she was commanded. You might say, well, any father who demands stuff of girls can... I don't think it was that way. He sought for her welfare every day when he would go by there. I believe he loved her and she loved him. He was a good father. He raised her with good character, I believe. So he, through Mordecai, created a beautiful woman of character. All of these attributes converged at the right time, in the right place, in the right heart, to move the heart of the king. He was truly blessed with her. She was one, I think, of whom Hebrews says the world was not worthy. Would you agree? I think so. But God gave her to him for the express purpose to save much people alive. Here's a principle I believe we have from God in this first point, and I hope you'll catch this. When you surrender your heart all out for God, he will take care of you. So God gave her to him for the express purpose of much people alive. But here's the principle. When you surrender your all to him and call out for him for help in trouble, he will not refuse you. I can't believe that any Christian who will humble himself, I'm talking about, we could do a false humility. We could pray out loud. We could fast, and people know we're fasting. But if there's a person that comes clean with God, with no holds barred, nothing between them and the Savior, do you think God's going to say no to them? I don't believe so. Now, people have suffered before, and sometimes God allows that. But for this first principle, what I want you to see is, when you are surrendered to God, God will move on your behalf. And you know what he'll do? He'll use others to help you. There's no doubt that Ahasuerus was used here for the people. Haman was used against the people. So Haman was willing to give himself over to wickedness. Ahasuerus was willing, in his probably ignorance, to love this woman. And God took that man, and blessed this woman and her whole entire nation. So I'm telling you, if you will surrender yourself to God, if you're in trouble, don't be surprised if someone comes along your path that blesses you. Whether an angel, whether a lost person, whether a saved person. So, if you surrender to God and call upon him for help in the time of trouble, he will not refuse you. Because God wouldn't be God if not that. Remember Psalm 50:15, and call upon me in the day of trouble. I will deliver thee, and thou shalt glorify me. I guarantee there was a lot of glorification going on when this was said and done. But he will use people in your time of need. She and Mordecai had yielded all to him with no outside hope besides Jehovah. They were doomed under the law of the Medes and the Persians. It was unalterable. That death sentence was pretty much secure. But he moved the very one who sealed their doom with the stamp of his ring. The very person who signed their death warrant, the only one that had the authority to sign the death warrant. Remember, Satan, he went after Job, but he couldn't do anything to Job unless God approved it. This is the king that set it in motion. Not like God, but in that position of leadership. So God moved the very one who sealed their doom with the stamp of his ring. She so affected him. This woman so affected him. When this woman came before him, I don't know what her countenance was like. I don't know if there were tears. I don't know if there was fortitude. But I think all those things mixed together. This woman moved him by the sight of her face, by the sight of her character. She so affected him. Can you see her inner beauty? Her beauty, and then her inner beauty coming to him in concern for a people, laying her very life on the line. Her purity and her purpose was unlike anything he had seen, I believe. He was affected to help her, and not just a little. He said her petition would be granted, the request shall be performed, even to the half of the kingdom. Now, my point from this is, if you surrender to God, God will move people into your path to help you. You think I can prove that in the Bible? Do you think there's other passages where God moved a lost man to help? Absolutely. Daniel had Darius, remember? Daniel would not stop praying to God. And God had Darius there right at the right time. Guess what the other presidents wanted to do? They wanted to trick the king, just like they tricked Ahasuerus. They said, "Oh, king." In the back of their situation, they hated Daniel because he was above them. And they said, "We can't get him on anything. He lives too good." "Oh, I know how we can get him. We can get him on his God." And that's what's going to happen in our generation, probably. In our generations, they're going to look at the way you live, and they're going to hate you, and they're going to say, "Well, we can't. They don't break the law. They don't steal. They don't commit adultery. Let's make up stories about them." They're going to do whatever they can. But Daniel had Darius, so they convinced. I don't want to get my stories mixed up because there's Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. But I think it was Darius. They said, no other person can pray to you for 30 days except you. They can't pray to another God except for you. Well, he foolishly accepts that. As soon as he did it, they went to Daniel's house. He knew the decree was written. Guess what he did? I don't think it's a big deal, Lord, if I kind of alter my prayer. When I go out to eat, I just kind of say a quick prayer. Obviously Daniel's faith was much more powerful than that. Nothing stopped him. He opened his windows again, or left them open, and he prayed just like he always had. And they're like, "Perfect! He fell right into our trap. This is awesome. We're going to get rid of him. We're going to all be able to move up a notch." No, that's not what happened. So Darius realizes he did a dumb thing. He passes the night away with can't sleep, same thing. Next morning, he goes running, and he says, "Daniel, are you alive? Oh, king, live forever. God has sent his angel and stopped the mouths of the lions." Well, now he had fulfilled the law of the Medes and Persians. Now he says, "Now I'm taking over." He took all those people, their women, their children, everyone, cast them into the den of lions, and the Bible says the lions had mastery over their bones. You might say, "That's kind of cruel, God." You mess with God's people, he's going to stand for his people. Okay, don't forget that. If you don't know Christ, you're going to be shocked at what that wonderful and loving God will do. He has to. He has to judge because he's good. Okay, and that's why he sent his son. So, there's an example. Israel had Cyrus to help them. He helped them rebuild the temple. God moved Ahasuerus to be the human agent to rescue his people. How about in World War II? God moved upon a Christian family. So these were lost examples. God moved upon a Christian family, the Ten Boom family, and they hid Jews in their home in Holland and saved thousands of Jews. Has God ever used an inanimate object to stand in the way of the destruction of his people? Can you think of any examples? How about the Red Sea? The Red Sea, God opened the Red Sea and he crushed the Egyptians, drowned them, I should say, in the Red Sea. God will take inanimate objects to fight for his people. If you're on God's side, you're on a good side. All right? So if we stand for him, he will stand for us. Make that decision. No matter what I'm gonna face, I'm gonna stand for God, and God will stand for you. You know what? It might end up in death. Look at all the people in Hebrews 11 that lost their lives. I don't know what God's going to happen, but even if he does allow your life to be taken, he'll be with you, and you won't be ashamed. All right? But be faithful to him, and he will have his. Here's the point number one. If you're faithful to God, he's going to have his people in place. Listen to Acts chapter 18 and verse 9 and 10. This is what God said to Paul. "Be not afraid, but speak, and hold not thy peace, for I am with thee, and no man shall set on thee to hurt thee, for I have much people in the city." So the Apostle Paul, the mighty Apostle Paul, he was scared. He was scared of what might happen. The Lord came by him and said, "Don't be afraid. I have a bunch of people in this place." And God has said it in other places, there's more with us than there with them. So if we give our lives over to him in our troubles, he will raise up helpers. So if you get nothing out of this, point number one, if you are fully surrendered, if you've given everything to God, nothing held back, he is going to protect you. He is going to be with you. All right? He'll raise up helpers. So if we give our lives to him in our troubles, he will raise us up helpers. We will see in this passage that it is not only the king. There's another man that pokes his head in here, and I want to read that to you as well. But it's not only the king. And by the way, will you volunteer to be a helper in someone else's time of need? Remember when God said to Paul, "I have much people in this place." Are you on that list of God where he'd say, "Oh, I got somebody in Lodi. Oh, for sure. I'll use them to help this person." I hope you're looking for those opportunities. So number one, the king pressed her to tell him her wish. Now let's see number 2. Esther pleads for the welfare of her people. She pleads for their very lives. We'll see this in verse 3 and 4. Now, before we see what she asked for, remember, he said, I'll give it to you, even to the half of the kingdom. Is that what Esther wanted? She had no care for the half of the kingdom. Look at verse 3 and 4. Then Esther, the queen, answered and said, if I have found favor in thy sight, O king. Remember, he could take her life. He could get dissatisfied with her and she could be dead. If I have found favor in thy sight, O king. God gave her the character, right? God gave her the beauty, but she's literally, all her hope is in God and in this king. O king, if it please the king, let my life be given me at my petition, and my people at my request. For we are sold, I and my people, to be destroyed, to be slain, and to perish. But if we had been sold for bondmen and bondwomen, I had held my tongue, although the enemy could not countervail the king's damage. In other words, if you would have just sold us as slavery, I wouldn't have worried about it. But I want you to know, even if the money that Haman gave, it's not enough to cover the damage you will have from losing us, by killing us or losing us to slavery. That's what she reached out to him to tell him. So, before we see what she asked for, we're finding out about her characters too. Can you place yourself there at the scene? Picture yourself at the scene. They're at a beautiful banqueting place, probably her quarters, right? Or her apartment or her mansion, I don't know. So there's a beautiful place. Can you imagine the hanging? They're reclining at a chair at the table, and she has her sleeping quarters right there. And there's a beautiful garden out, and we know there's windows. I'll prove that to you. But it's a beautiful place. This was the queen's quarters. A palace garden was just outside of this door. Royal servants, a window to see the royal homes. With all of her wealth, she was literally poor or humble in spirit. She wasn't flashing the glib. She wasn't doing any of that. Imagine her passionate plea to her king. It's powerful what she says. In humility, trusting in God, but needing the help of a human monarch. She had called out to God. She had done everything. There was nothing held back. They fasted 3 days and 3 nights. Prayers were constantly on her lips for the sake of Haman. And Mordecai was barely spared the day before. And she had to see God working. She knew what was going on in the kingdom. One day, they're dirt, basically. The next day, Mordecai's lifted up. And now Haman seems to be going down. She knows what's going on. But boy, what a story of intrigue. Now, she in humility is trusting in God, needing the help of a human monarch. She has done what she could. She pleads her case in respect as a servant in his kingdom. She asks for her life to be given her at her petition and her people at her request. Can you picture her heartfelt wish? Was her heart beating? Was she confident? Was she struggling for words with tears? I don't know. We are sold, she says, like slaves, her and her people, but not to slavery, but to be destroyed, to be slain, to be killed, a mass execution on one day. There was a literal day, some 12 months ahead, where it was on the calendar, and she's pleading. She says, we're not just going into slavery, we're going to be killed, and we're going to be destroyed. We're all going to perish. She's reaching out from her heart. Her people would be taken away, perishing, old and young, little children and women. Chapter 3 and 13 tells us that. Now you notice, I didn't catch this, but the commentators did. She words it to the king exactly the way it was written in the post. She said, we're sold to be killed, slain, destroyed, something to that effect. So, was it a divine coincidence on her part? Ironside said her words must have deeply agitated the already toppling son of Hammedatha. Was it a divine coincidence on her part? But you know what? She didn't want the kingdom. She wanted her people. That's why she was so great. You know people that are interested in money? People want to hang around them because of what they got, but they don't have a whole lot of character. But she had the wealth, but she had the personal character. Remember when Satan offered Jesus? What did he offer him in the wilderness? He offered him all the kingdoms. What did Jesus choose? The people. Now, he owned everything already, right? The kingdoms are his, but he doesn't take the ownership of them yet. But they were already his by promise, by his position as the Son of God. But he chose people first. He came to die. He didn't come to put his scepter on this earth and rule yet. He came to die. Very much similar. I love how the Bible has typology. But so He came for his people first. She was probably scared. She was meek. But that time Mordecai had told her of King. Chapter 4 and verse 14. Who knoweth whether thou art come to the kingdom for such a time as this? This moment in time, this meal was the centerpiece for her nation. It was probably the pinnacle moment in her life. She got to, after that, live a more peaceable life, I bet you. But she knew God was working because she saw Mordecai honored the day before. She knew the gallows were waiting for Mordecai, but she had no idea how God was going to perform their rescue. Boy, what was about to happen. God prepared her for this day. I ask you this, will we let God move in the circumstances in our lives to let him work through us? I hope that your life is so surrendered that you will say, God, I don't know what to expect tomorrow. I don't know what to expect today. I don't know what to expect in a year, a week, a month. I don't know any of this. But Lord, I want to put myself in a path where you can use me in the lives of others. Should we not? Should it not just be about us getting through this world safely? Lord, just get me to the rapture. Get me to the rapture. I'll hide. No. Should we not be willing to give our lives so that God could do something with us? I hope that's your heart, and I want it to be my heart too. So, God prepared her for this day. I ask you, are we letting him prepare us for some work? Now watch. She has now given her request. She has done all she could do. She's at the end of her barrel, if you would, or the end of her store. Now watch what God is able to do. You know, God could have solved this much earlier, but he allowed it to come to these climactic points. I wonder if he does that to let us know beyond any shadow of a doubt that he is real. I believe so. She has now revealed herself that her nation is about to be killed. The king didn't know her nationality yet. Haman didn't know. She was told to hold her identity. Mordecai in chapter 2 verse 10 had charged her not to. God was providentially working. It must have been the providence of God, but now it is revealed at the precise time of God. She identifies herself, she will in a moment actually, she's identifying herself as a nation that's cursed. For some reason, Haman and the king don't know. I guess, was there more than one nation cursed? I don't know. But she hasn't revealed yet, but she's opening the story up now. But now it is revealed at the precise time of God. She identifies herself beautifully with God and her people. Now, again, they don't know she's a Jew yet, but Esther now has stepped behind any protection. She stepped behind any protection. She's lined herself up with Jehovah and the people of God, and they're about to find out her nationality. I think of this as baptism. You know, obviously baptism is not as dramatic, but if we were in a time of persecution and it was against the law to be baptized, and you went out and got baptized, you would be taking your stand with Jesus Christ, and you'd be taking your stand with the people of God. And he deserves that stand. Everyone who's not baptized, you should do it. It's the first step of obedience. But she stood with her people. One woman standing against the whole kingdom. Amazing. So, notice, she says, if we were sold as bondmen and bondwomen, she would have held her tongue. But even Haman's money wouldn't cover the king's damage, losing them. I ask you, have you unashamedly identified yourself with Jesus? Don't be ashamed to do that. It's not always easy. Why? The world's against it. But unashamedly speak up for your Lord. So, now number 3, and lastly, we've seen the king press her for her wish. We've seen her plead for the welfare of her people. But now number 3, we see God, through the king, punishing Haman for his wickedness. God now is punishing Haman for his wickedness. Watch now how the king responds. I love this. Love this. I mean, talk about an exciting story. Verse 5. Then the king Ahasuerus answered and said unto Esther, the queen, can you picture it? Who is he and where is he that durst presume in his heart to do so? How would that be if you were a king with all power and someone threatened your spouse? Who is he and where is he? Show him to me. He's dog me. Right? That's my adding in there, sorry. Who is he and where is he that durst presume in his heart to do so? Who under the reign of my kingdom would dare touch the queen? So both Haman and the king don't have the full picture yet. J. Vernon McGee says, Haman didn't know that the decree to slay the nation of Israel would affect the queen. There he was at the banquet table, reclining on a couch, the prime minister with the full confidence of the queen, and all of a sudden this has dropped in his lap. One of the other commentators said if he knew this was about to happen, he would have hightailed it a long time ago out of there. But watch the king's response. Can you see the fury beginning to rise in his face? Who? Where is this man? So, That's where he's at. What monster would want to kill the queen? H.A. Ironside said, he at once makes her enemy his enemy, and demands the name of the infamous wretch he could dare conceive so fearful a plot. The guilty conspirator reclining just but a few feet from him. McGee says the king asked who hatched this plot, and then Esther reveals her bravery. Look at her response in verse 6. Verse 6 says, and Esther said, the adversary and enemy is this wicked Haman. Can you picture the room? It's just three of them. Maybe there's some servants going in and out. They're having this conversation. Beautiful garden outside. Maybe the wind's blowing in the beautiful shears and all that stuff. And she says, your enemy, my enemy, is this wicked Haman. Then Haman was afraid before the king and the queen. God has let this powerful story come to a climactic head. He could have just killed him like he killed Herod. Remember when Herod, they said, it's the voice of a god, and he was eaten up in worms and died because he didn't give God the glory. That's not what God's doing here. Haman had tenaciously hung against God's people, and now God is bringing his death, basically his punishment, into super focus. In other words, basically it's like he's in the face of God. Don't you ever mess with my kids. Amazing. All right, so what a story. So immediately Haman knows the fear the Jews had. For the first time now, his life is in danger. And he didn't care about all these people. Remember when they made that decree, him and the king sat down to drink at their banquet of wine? They just basically put 15 or so million people's lives, 15 million, a nation. They basically put a death sentence on them, and then they went ahead with their party. Well, now it's Haman's turn. God is a God who will turn the tables on you. If you're bold in your wickedness, don't be surprised if God is bold in his judgment upon you. So, once she lets the king know, Wiersbe says, without openly accusing him, Esther has implicated the king as well in a horrible crime. And he was bound to feel guilty. Even if he didn't know these were the Jews yet, I guarantee God's pressing on him. Wiersbe goes on, he had already received a surprise when he learned the nationality of his queen. We'll see that in a little bit. But now his favorite officer was the adversary and enemy. Ironside said Satan had again been foiled in his attempt to destroy the line of promise. And God had once more vindicated his word. God is greatly moving behind the scenes. Remember, no weapon formed against Israel will prosper. That's Isaiah 54 and verse 17. God will bless those that bless Israel and curse those who curse him. If America decides to go against Israel, we're done for. Genesis chapter 12 and verse 3. He says he will curse those who curse them, and he will bless those that bless Israel. Now the king's wrath is kindled. Wiersbe said his anger must have been volcanic. Verse number 7. And the king arising from the banquet hall of wine, and the king arising from the banquet of wine in his wrath went into the palace garden. So in this beautiful place, something horrible is occurring. And Haman stood up to make her. The horrible thing was the fact that he wanted to kill Esther and the queen. But the wonderful thing is what God is going to do. And Haman stood up to make request for his life. One of the commentators said they think he fell back onto the bed because he got up. I don't know if that's the case. It doesn't matter. But he stood up after the thing. The king's heading out in his volcanic anger. And I don't think he fell, but if he did fall, either way, he ended up on that bed with Esther. Watch. He stood up to make request for his life to Esther the queen, for he saw that there was evil determined against him by the king. Remember, he had to still get permission. Anything that happens goes through God's filtering process. But the king goes out to the garden in his anger, figuring out how he let this happen. Can you imagine the wide range of emotions in him? He knows it's Haman now. He knows it's the Jews that they're talking about. He knows this lady, his wife, the dear one, his basically second guy in control. And he didn't even know. Everything's just falling apart for Haman. God is literally tearing his house apart. That's what we're seeing. So now the king's out there. Can you imagine the range of emotions? I got to kill this guy. I got to do something to this guy. I'm part of this. Lord, what do? I can't alter the thing. It's the law of the immediate. What am I going to do? And he's super angry. Wiersbe said he endangered the lives of two very special people. Mordecai, who worked to save his life, and Esther, his beloved wife. So how will he protect her? How will he handle this egregious error? What will he do to this wicked man who tricked him? Who would dare put his hand on his queen? What had he done? How foolish he had been. There needs to be something that riles us up as believers that we'll fight for. There needs to be something when they kick the football, when they blaspheme the name of God, when Whatever it is, there needs to be something that drives us to move for God. But who would dare put his hand on his queen? But McGee said he had to cool off a little so that he could think clearly. At this time, Haman stands up to plead for his life. My, have the tables turned. For a moment, let's think about the reality that hit Haman like a Mack truck. He's in trouble, dire trouble. He was literally cruising to the top. And if some of the commentators, what they say are true, he possibly, one of the commentators said, and I didn't think of this, when Big Fan and T-Rush were plotting against the king, what if Haman was involved in that? The Bible doesn't say that. It might not be the case at all. But what if he had a desire to topple that kingdom and become the next leader? I don't know. I won't say that because that's not what the Bible says. But these are behind-the-scenes stuff. It's very possible that he could have been involved in that. At the very least, he wanted to be number 2. And he wanted to be adored, praised, and worshipped. And God will never have that. If you desire to be number 1, you will never be number 1. If you don't care about being number 1, you're going to be lifted up. Make sure your heart, it has the right thoughts in it going on. So, who would dare put his hand on him? So, this egregious error, what is he going to do? He had to cool off so he could think. For a moment, let's think about the reality that hit Haman. Everything's changed. His life is now in extreme danger from being at the pinnacle of the king's leadership. Now he's in extreme danger of death. We can learn a lot from this third point. Numbers 32:23. Be sure your sin will find you out. I love this verse, Proverbs 26:27. Whoso diggeth a pit shall fall therein, and he that rolleth a stone, it will return upon him. He put a big stone up the hill. Okay, when I'm ready to pull the stick out, it's going to come and it's going to kill all the Jews. Guess what? All the Jews got out of the way, and he was the one person getting rolled over by the stone. Praise God for his redemption and his reward against evil. But whoso diggeth a pit shall fall therein, and he that rolleth a stone, it will return upon him. God was enacting a command found in Exodus 21, the principle of reciprocal justice, one article called it. An eye for an eye. That is how God is. Many times in the passage, what people tried to do to someone else, they got it themselves. Those that are bold in their sin might be surprised at God's boldness for his people. Matthew 18 and verse 6, whoso shall offend one of these little ones which believe in me. Now she was grown up, but did God look at Esther and Mordecai as one of his little ones? I believe so. Whoso shall offend one of these little ones which believe in me, it were better for him that a millstone were hanged about his neck and that he were drowned in the depths of the sea. It would have been better for Haman to die that way. The previous day, Haman had no idea of what was about to happen. Proverbs 27:1 says, boast not thyself of tomorrow, for thou knowest not what a day may bring forth. Galatians 6 and verse 7 says this, be not deceived. God is not mocked. You know what? He does get mocked a lot. But the way God looks at it, I'm not mocked. By the time I finish, everyone will know that I was not mocked. But God, be not deceived. God is not mocked. For whatsoever a man soweth, that shall he also reap. Terry Angel, a preacher, said, you always reap what you sow. If you plant something, you're going to get something back from it. You reap. So he gave 3 rules. You always will reap for what you sow. If you sow sin, sin will bite you back. Even if you're saved, maybe. He forgives us and gets us out from under the burden. But many times saved people suffer because of their sins. Right? You'll always reap what you sow. You will reap after you sow. And you will reap more than you sow. Haman got paid back way more than he dished out. And that's the promise of God. You're not going to sin before God and have the last laugh. It will not happen. If he would have, now think of this, our speaker last week said, if you would just have a biblical worldview, you're going to be saved. Do you realize that if you'll take this book and let this thing guide you, you are going to be saved? You might have troubles, you might have trials, but at the end, you'll be able to stand in that kingdom with this book, if it's there, and I'm assuming it, I know it's there. But you'll be in that kingdom and you'll sit down safely with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. You'll have your mansion. You'll sit down. You know why? Because you decided to have a biblical worldview. The world we are in now is in extreme trouble because they're not using this book, this old antiquated book, and their life is a wreck, basically. And then in eternity, they'll say, I wish I spent time in this book. I would highly encourage you to make this, doesn't mean you can't listen to anything else, but this could be your foundation, and this will get you through life. Okay? So, you're not going to sin before God and have the last laugh. So none of this would have happened to Haman if he had a biblical worldview. If he had looked back to his ancestors and said, they did the wrong thing. Remember Rahab? She was part of the Canaanites. She heard the stories and she said, I'm not following my heritage. I don't care how much the heritage is ingrained with me. I don't care how long my grandma believed in Molech or whatever it was. She said, none of that moves me. I'm going with God. If Haman would have had that worldview, he would have been saved. So, if he only had sought God's way, and I ask you, do you endeavor to see things God's way, or do you only care about your way? How much sway does the Bible have in your life? How much sway does church have in your life? How much sway does the conviction of the Holy Spirit have in your life? How much do you allow Him? That again is the free will of God. He's going to allow you the ability to respond to God as little or as much. He's going to influence you, but you have the final say, whether you're going to listen to God or listen to this world's spirit, or listen to your own spirit. So, if he would have pondered his way, his end would have produced joy, but instead it produced eternal misery. Wiersbe said this arrogant, I love this, catch this, those of you that remember poems from the old days. Wiersbe said, this arrogant bully became, as usually, in the face of a disaster, a whining coward. He was not a giant, he was only a midget full of pride and hot air. All the king's horses and all the king's men could not put Haman back together again. I thought that was really good. A Jewish man who wouldn't bow before him, but now he bows before a Jewish woman. What do we see the king do to help Esther? Look at verse 8. Then the king returned out of the palace garden into the place of the banquet of wine. And Haman was fallen upon the bed whereon Esther was. Now, my thinking is he had enough time out there, but he's so mad, and the killer is right there in his house, so it probably wasn't too long. But by this time, Haman basically said, I'm rat bait. I need Esther's help. So he falls down on the bed. Or maybe he fell the other way. I don't know. It doesn't matter. But watch. And Haman was fallen upon the bed whereon Esther was. Then said the king, will he force the queen also before me in the house? You know what he means by that. He probably knew that wasn't happening. But that's his anger. Now you're literally on the bed with my wife? Are you kidding me? Watch this. Will he force the queen also before me in the house? As the word went out of the king's mouth, they covered Haman's face. What does that mean? Someone give me a visual.
He covered his face.
Somebody came in and put something over his head, you're toast. That's the sign his death is about to happen. Powerful. So the stone has rolled back on him. God abases him in pride. He is utterly humbled. His face is covered. He's about to lose his life. Remember I said, and we're going to close in a couple minutes. Remember I said that when you surrender to God, He's going to have your people in places in your life. He had another one here. Another one comes to her aid in her defense. And I remind you, you stand for God, He'll stand for you. Harbona, watch what Harbona says. Verse 9. And Harbona, one of the chamberlains, and I never saw this in all the times I've read it, but it's important that we let the Bible just speak in all of its power to us and the details of it. Harbona, one of the chamberlains, said before the king, watch this, behold, also the gallows 50 cubits high. He pointed out a window. Behold, look at that up there. You see that? That was built by Haman so Mordecai could be killed. I never saw that. But we need to see this is real life. These are real situations. His face has just been covered over. A whole bunch of guys came in and grabbed him. And he says, look at the gallows out there. So the people knew that he had built that. He probably bragged about building it. And watch what the king says. Well, he goes on. He says, behold, also the gallows, 50 cubits high, 75 feet, 7.5 stories tall. There was this place for Haman or for Mordecai that was going to be swinging that day. But God changed the whole story. So he says, behold, also the gallows, which Haman had made for Mordecai, who had spoken good for the king. So God's got people. He's got his people adding to the chorus of witnesses. Hey, that's where he's going to die. That's where Mordecai was supposed to die, because look what he did for you, king. He spoke good for you. Then the king said, hang him thereon. So they hanged Haman on the gallows that he had prepared for Mordecai. Then was the king's wrath pacified. Amazing. What's the king's sentence? Death. He was pacified. I find this interesting, and we'll close. He was pacified Wiersbe said this is the same word used when the waters of the flood were receding. What does that mean? God had destroyed the world. He had been angered at their wickedness. As the waters were receding, God was being pacified. He didn't want to ever do that again, but God was just in doing it. God is just in the destruction of evil. But now the king is pacified. He's taken care of. This man that was his enemy is now dying. Remember today, if you are in trouble and surrendered all the way with God, God will rescue you, and he may and will use others to help you. When you seek others, will you let him use you to seek others instead of self? God will not forget you. And if you defy God, you will not get away with it. If you go against what he loves, you will fail. Now, we may be disgusted at Haman, but we were enemies of God once. Only through repentance and faith will we come under his wings. If you have never reached out to the Lord, you are in danger. But if you come to him, you'll find grace and forgiveness. I hope you have peace today and call upon God. And then lastly, believer, I want to tell you this. I hope that you live passionately for God. I hope you're not living a lethargic Christian life. This excitement, we may not face that excitement, but we can have beating in our hearts the same passion for our God and same passion for this world. I hope that these passages will move you to, if you're not saved, to be saved. Secondly, I hope it'll move you to live all out for God.